Member for Banff-Kananaskis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, sir. You can go next. It's okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, member. Yeah, the kindness just overflows right now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my pleasure to rise in the House today to speak to my first bill in debate. I'm very excited about this opportunity. Bill for the Tax Statutes Amendment Act is kind of a conglomerate of changes that will be made to a few other acts. And I'll just start by reiterating some of the things that my colleagues shared yesterday, that we are pleased to see the fuel tax pause extended. Albertans are facing a cost of living crisis, and so movements like this do help to address that crisis. We have long supported the fuel tax pause, and we were the voice behind its extension back in 2022, so it's nice to see it reflected in legislation today. The fuel tax should be paused until inflation levels stabilize, however long that takes, because it really is going to help many Albertans who are living paycheck to paycheck and hundreds of thousands of them that are on the brink of homelessness. This pause will help them to keep a roof over their heads and choose food and utilities rather than having to choose between the two. I did want to rise today to speak mostly to the amendments to the Tourism Levy Act. As everybody knows, I live in the most beautiful riding in the province. And, sorry. That's a little jab over there to God's country on the other side of the house. No, I do live in the most tourism popular part of the province. Over 5 million people a year, Mr. Speaker, visit the Banff-Kananaskis riding to partake in a whole array of outdoor recreational activities and cultural events, and it is my pleasure to be their MLA. Changes to the tourism tax levy directly affect many of my constituents, not only as being a major tourism destination in the province, but also having economies that are largely founded on tourism. The communities of Banff and Canmore are almost entirely dependent on tourism as economic revenue for those towns, and so changes to the tourism levy have the potential to really directly affect the communities that I represent. The changes in Bill 4, the changes to the Tourism Levy Act will repeal changes that had required online brokers to collect and remit the tourism levy instead of the hosts. And so the changes in this bill, as I understand it, now go back to making sure that the hosts of short-term tourism accommodation will pay that levy instead. The changes in this bill, through conversations with tourism stakeholders in Banff-Kananaskis, I have come to understand that the changes in this bill reflect requests that they have put forward, and so that is also a positive thing to see. It is nice to see that changes in legislation are being put forward that address concerns that stakeholders have discussed with the government. It did take a few months for those consultations to happen, but that's okay because summer was a long time of us being out in communities consulting with folks. As with most pieces of legislation, the proof is really in the pudding, as they say, and it really depends on how these things are rolled out and implemented. I can appreciate that not everything is in legislation and that some pieces will need to be in regulation, and so I will be looking very specifically for how and when and how often the levy will be remitted from hosts, and making sure that the process by which hosts can remit the tourism levy is user-friendly and easy and equitable, and makes sure that everybody who hosts tourists, whether that's through an online marketplace or a hotel or a more formal business, has a way that they can pay the tourism levy that is easy. And we also need to have some transparency around what happens to that tourism levy once it is collected. Transparency in how revenues are gathered and spent, I would just offer, has not necessarily been the strong suit of this government over time. particularly with things like the Kananaskis Conservation Pass, which in effect is another tourism levy that dramatically affects my riding. And we saw the Kananaskis Conservation Pass being collected, but it wasn't really reported on how that money was spent. So I would like to see that improved. And while that may not be reflected in legislation, that will be something that I will be advocating for. The original Tourism Levy Act was implemented with the intent of ensuring that those dollars were going back to tourism marketing destination organizations like Travel Alberta or like Tourism Canmore-Kananaskis that work to draw people to that specific tourism attraction or that specific part of the province. That has not been completed as of yet. And so I'd really like to see, that could be an amendment in the Act that the tourism levy revenue is generated and directed towards marketing, destination marketing organizations. So that could be in the Act. The current mandate letter for the Minister of Tourism does talk about assessing the advantages and disadvantages of having the tourism levy invested in tourism-related growth initiatives and making recommendations. I'll just take a minute right now to share some of those advantages. So basically, Travel Alberta is a marketing destination organization. They have been for a very long time. It has been their job to tell the world about why Alberta is so great and why people should come here for their holidays. Recently, however, Travel Alberta has expanded their mandate to include not just marketing, not just destination marketing, but also to include things like small business grants to help small businesses in communities develop products and initiatives that can bring more tourists to Alberta to enjoy this great province that we have. And so that is one very significant advantage of directing the tourism levy to organizations like Travel Alberta, is that there's now this avenue for that funding to help support small business to succeed. Canmore and Banff, Mr. Speaker, are communities made up mostly of small businesses. The innovation in the tourism sector is awesome, and it's something that we should always be encouraging to flourish. It's incredible to me to see how many people just carve out their own little unique niche in the tourism offer to take people around and show them the amazingness that Alberta has to offer. That is small business that we need to foster and help grow across communities in Alberta. Travel Alberta also is on the precipice of releasing a strategy for tourism, hopefully very soon, and that identifies 10 tourism destination zones. Canmore and Banff are a legacy zone because we've been doing tourism for 130 years, but there are many other tourism development zones that do not have the same experience. And so, again, directing the tourism levy to Travel Alberta will help those rural communities build their tourism offer so that maybe they don't need to rely on coal mines as their only source of economic income. I just had to throw in coal because, it's kind of a thing. So I really would like to see that loop closed a little bit more. But the other piece about this tourism levy changes is that it is retroactive. And so I just have some questions around wanting to understand how much money for the tourism levy did we miss out on while we hadn't closed the loop on this process of gathering the levy from hosts? And what will the process look like to collect that levy retroactively? How will we make sure that we bring our tourism businesses and hosts of temporary accommodations up to speed with paying the tourism levy? The other piece of this that I want to share with other members is that Travel Alberta is not the only destination marketing organization in the province. Travel Alberta helps smaller communities that maybe don't have their own destination marketing thing. Canmore has Tourism Canmore-Kananaskis. Other smaller communities have their own branches of tourism. These organizations operate independently of government and independently of businesses, and their sole job is to help create a draw for their community, for tourists to come to their communities. This tourism levy is supposed to be going to them. When I talk with people at Tourism Banff-Kananaskis, funding is always a challenge for them. They never have the funding that they want to truly sell the destination on the global scale. And that's Canmore. You don't really have to sell Canmore, but they're still strapped in trying to find the funding to do that. So making sure that that tourism levy gets back to those organizations, I think, is really critical. And I'll just close with some final thoughts about the importance of tourism. Tourism in Banff and Canmore alone generates $2.5 billion for the Alberta economy every year. This is not a small industry. Tourism is massive and it is growing. And so how we support rural communities to develop their tourism offer is not only a nice thing to do for small business, it's actually critical to the economic success of rural communities. The other thing is that how we manage and plan for tourism is also critical. In the Bow Valley, we have learned that you can welcome the world, but if you don't have the roads and the water treatment and the businesses and the restaurants and the hotel rooms for the world to enjoy, you're not ready. And so Travel Alberta has a responsibility to work with communities to grow their tourism sector in a way that they're not counting their chickens before they're hatched, so to speak. We need to make sure that we strategically plan for tourism. This bill sets us up to do that, but it doesn't quite go far enough. We need more strategic direction in tourism planning and management across the province of Alberta. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, we do. I had another thought. Now it's gone. Shoot. So I guess just in closing, the changes to the Tourism Levy Act as proposed in Bill 4 are great, and they are steps in the right direction, but it doesn't go quite far enough to give our tourism industry the security that it needs to truly grow and flourish moving forward. Thank you.